Meet me.
Operator Sigret. At your service. Code received. Executing commands.
Alright, so today we're going to talk about Operator Sigret. So I actually haven't seen this video yet. I haven't seen her skills, so it's my first time, and I'm going to give you guys my honest assessment of her as a hero based on what I see. So I usually skip this story part because I don't really care. In the beginning, they always discuss their background or whatever. Feel free to watch that in your own time. Let's see her stats first. Oh, so she's a ranger. That's interesting. She has like an axe, though. Why is she a ranger? Whatever, it doesn't really matter. She's a Libra. Looks like she has pretty high base attack, low health, okay defense, a lot of crit chance, pretty high crit damage, and 115 speed, so she's pretty fast. Not going to be like an initiator like Acid or Cerise or anything, but that's actually pretty decent. So it looks like a standard DPS base stat, and both her imprints are attack, which is good, so the whales out there, if they can triple S her, obviously they'll hit super hard. So I'm going to turn the volume back on. Let's watch the first skill real quick. So they're going over S2 first. Holy cow! Okay, so let's read this. Batters the enemy with a scythe, grants an extra turn when the enemy is defeated, almost like regular Sigret's S2, although it doesn't have anything to do with the enemy being defeated. Penetrates the target's defense by 50%, or by 100% when the target is granted a barrier. Holy cow, so this is going to be like an FCC counter, because 100% defense penetration is no joke. All you guys know how hard Watcher Shuri and Spez hit. Those are two other heroes with 100% defense ignore. And that kind of explains in this clip how this Sigret managed to one-tap a Rowana, which is typically quite tanky. And was that through Aurius? I think that was through Aurius. Yeah, it was through Aurius because the FCC took damage. So really this thing hit for probably 20% more. So what is that, 46? So almost 30k. Granted, in this video they're running with an Oxlot CDOM, and you know, for highlight videos, you know, Oxlots, this thing's probably super slow and stacked on attack, so it's probably not going to be real-world feasible damage, but still, that's pretty insane. So now let's go to our next skill. Let's watch it and then let's read it. I want to see what it looks like. I think the opening animation was the S3. It looked pretty cool. That didn't seem to hit particularly hard. Let's see what it does, though. Calls in drones to attack all enemies with a 75% chance to decrease buff durations by 1 turn. So it's a kind of a strip. Like for 1 turn things, it's a strip. Like it's basically the same as Cerise's. So it'll strip immunities, but not FCC's barrier. It also decreases combat readiness by 20%. And it increases attack of all allies for 2 turns. That's interesting. The Soul Burn extends duration of, so basically makes the attack buff 3 turn. And with Molas, it has a 100% chance. Huh. This is a pretty interesting skill. It actually looks really good. But before I talk about all of them, let's look at her S1. I'm sure that will be pretty basic. So let's look at the animation. Yeah, it just looks the same as regular Sigret's. Attacks the enemy with a scythe before healing the ally with the lowest health. Amount recovered increases proportional to the caster's attack. I want to see this heal here, because this is an attack stacked Sigret here. 1800 heal, and I'm assuming based on how much damage she did to the Rowana, that this Sigret has a lot of attacks. So it looks like the heal is pretty measly, but you know, it gives your cleave some sustain, so not the worst thing, but I don't think you could like rely on it to fully heal anyone. So the S1 doesn't seem to do anything else, just a basic S1, no debuffs, and basically it just does a little tiny little heal. Maybe it'll win you a match every once in a while, but probably not that significant in the long term. Okay, so now that we went over her skills, how are people going to use her? I think the interesting thing about her is, well, obviously she's going to do redonkulous damage against teams with barrier. So the main things that I could think of that she's going to counter are Fallen Cecilia and to an extent LR Crow, because she's not that fast. I mean, 115 isn't terrible, but she's not going to be like a turn 1 unit. So probably if you pair her with something like Flitica into an LR Crow draft, you can trigger the barrier with Flitica's S2, and then everyone on the opposing team will have barrier, and then you can kind of wipe them out with Sigret. I kind of want to get a sense of this guy's speed. So that ML Sigret is really slow. So this thing's definitely stacked on attack. So when you pair something with Oxalot, you have to take everything with a grain of salt, because this could be like a 5k attack ML Sigret. I think RTA builds, they're never going to have this much damage. So the question is, even with full Death Pen, do the multipliers allow her to one-shot like a Ruel through a barrier? Maybe, but remember, if you're going to build her, you're probably going to need more like 210 to 230 speed on her if you're just going to use her with like Flitica or something, or double stack the CR pushes. So I don't think it's going to be very likely that, at least in RTA, she'll do anywhere near as much damage as you're seeing here. For Arena offense and Guild Wars, you can probably use her with Alots, and that'll be fine if you want to just nuke out a Ruel right away. But I don't think in RTA you're going to be going with like a 100 speed full damage build. So yeah, I mean, I think in a cleave team, you can kind of use this to one-shot tanky units. 100% Death Pen, again, is no joke. A lot like Watcher Shuri. Yeah, so I think that's about it for that move. For the S3, I think this move is actually pretty redonkulous. Now, the problem with her is she doesn't have that much speed, so at the high tiers, you're not going to be able to have her as your main initiator. But, I mean, it's basically a 100% strip for one turn, plus a CR pushback like Bazaar, plus the attack buff. The only other unit I'm aware of that has a strip and attack buff is Mui. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think a strip plus an attack buff combined is pretty huge, because that means your backup attackers or cleavers will do way more damage. Now, if you can comfortably get her to a super fast speed and like give the godliest speed gear ever, maybe you can use her as your main initiator. Have her go first, push up CDOM, everyone on your team has attack buff, and you push them back a little bit, and then you could basically have 3 cleave units go back to back with attack buff and all immunities down. So I think she can be used as an initiator. At the higher ends of RTA, it'll be risky because you're never going to outspeed like a Cerise or an Acid that's decently built with an Operator Sigret, but I think that is an option. So those are the 2 things I'm thinking. We're not going to talk about her S1 because it doesn't matter, but those are 2 main ways I could think of using her, as like a Bazaar with a built-in attack buff, or as like a cleave unit to immediately wipe out any super tanky unit. You would kind of utilize her similarly to Watcher Shuri. The problem with using her as something as like a immediate cleave unit is she won't have attack buffs. So really the only viable thing is like Alots, or you can use it with like Flitica, Vivian, or something. But my guess is if you don't have attack buff, even with 100% defense pen, you're not going to kill something like a tanky Crow or BMH or LR, anything like that. I think you'll need something else to give the attack buff for her to pull that off. So I'm not sure how great she will be at cleaving unless you surround her with something else that could provide attack buff like Mui or Vivian or Alots, something along those lines. The other way you could theoretically build her, but I think it'll be kind of wonky, is as a Bruiser. If you build her as a Bruiser, I mean, her S2 will still do a lot of damage, but I think the problem is you're going to have to really neuter her damage to get her tanky enough to use as a Bruiser, because she has no defensive skills, right? Like something like ML Lulu, you can get away with being squishy because she has like the barrier and the built-in stealth Dignus Orb, but ML Sigret has no defensive utility. So essentially, if you use her as a Bruiser, what the other team is going to do is just go on her and go on her hard. And you're going to have a tough time keeping her up. So I'm not so sure that you can use ML Sigret into a Bruiser draft because, if you run something like SSB Alencia, I think they're just going to feast on her. So that's... I'm not going to say that she's bad. I'm sure she's quite good. If she had like 125 base speed, I think this move would be pretty ridiculous. But I think she's gonna be kind of difficult to slot into your teams. And if you do manage to slot her into a team, I think it's gonna be very susceptible to bans, particularly in RTA. Like if you use her as an initiator, and they just ban her out or something, I think it'll be quite wonky to use her. So again, these are just initial impressions. My initial impressions are like, I'm going to try to pull for her, right? But I think if I was super resource star, like right now I only have like 500 mystics, so I probably won't get her anyway. But I would consider this a pass, I think. Like between the past few MLs, like if you compare it to ML Lulu, like I think ML Lulu is much easier to build and use than Operator Sigret. I think the interesting thing about Operator Sigret though is because she's kind of wonky, her kit's kind of wonky, if you see this drafted into you, I think the curious thing is going to be that you're not going to necessarily know how she's built right away. Actually, I take that back. Based on what else they draft, you'll probably know how they're built. Like, if they draft Operator Sigret into a Bruiser team, then it's probably going to be tankier than normal. If they draft it with, like, Alots, and you could assume that it's a high damage Sigret. With, like, a Flitica, you could assume it's a high speed, pretty high damage Sigret. And if you see no damage on their, like if you see a lot of other damage on their team, then it's probably an initiating Sigret just to strip and give attack buff. So you won't know from looking at Sigret herself, but looking at the rest of the draft, you could probably figure out what they're trying to do with her. So I think she's definitely an interesting unit. She has two very unique moves, but I think they don't synergize very well with each other because if you open with this and you let the other team get a turn, then you kind of give up that instant kill potential. If you want to use her as an instant kill unit with that barrier defense pen, then you need to bring some other source of attack buff, or I think there's a high chance based on that video I saw with the Alots that without attack buff she would not have killed that Rowana without attack buff. So you're going to need something else with attack buff, which basically means she needs to be paired with Alots, or like Flitica, Vivian, and you need to make sure your attack buffer doesn't get banned out or stopped in some other way. So I think this is going to be a very difficult to use hero. That's just my personal opinion. I'm trying to think of a draft I would use her in. I don't think she's going to be that easy to use. Like ML Lulu, basically, if they have Arbiter or something, you could draft her and you could kind of just bring her to any team and she'll kind of do her job. This one, I think her two moves are not very related now. If her S3 had a Soul Burn that gave her an extra turn or something, I think she'd be redonkulous and quite possibly busted. that would be pretty redonkulous. Yeah, so I think that's my initial thoughts of her. I think, obviously she's waifu material, but, for me, I would not consider her a must pull. I don't know what other E7 YouTubers are saying, but if I was like really selective about what I'm going to pull on with Mystics, I would probably pass on her. Like as a content creator, I'm going to try to get her anyway just to do a video on her, but I suspect she might just end up being benched. Arena offense, Guild Wars offense, I'm sure she'll do great, but I don't really care about that content because at this point in E7, there's so many heroes that you could probably, be fine in that content without any new heroes to begin with. So I usually mainly think about RTA. And for RTA purposes, if I was resource starved, I would honestly probably pass on this unless you have a really super duper idea on how to use her, because I think she'll be hard to build. She'll be susceptible to bans. Her S2 and S3 don't seem to synergize well together because basically you're going to pick one of the two to use in your opener, and you're going to have to build her accordingly, because if you're using her as a stripper, you're going to have to build high effectiveness, right? So her damage is not going to be that great. Otherwise, you're not going to strip or push anything back. If you're just bringing her for attack buff, why not just bring a Rosa? Other people can bring more utility if you're just using her for attack buff. So you're going to need effectiveness. If you want to use her S2 for one-shot potential, you're going to need high damage to one-shot stuff. So she kind of has like a problem of like clashing roles because she has very different abilities. So anyways, that's my first impression of Sigret. Feel free to call me an imbecile in the comments below if you disagree with anything I said. But my final initial verdict is I think she's a pass if you're resource starved. Obviously, if you're a waifu collector and you just love her artwork, logic doesn't matter. Just get her then. Get her and do whatever you want. But I think if, at least in my situation, if I was in that boat, I would probably pass. But I guess we'll see. We'll see how she shows up. And if she makes any changes to the RTA meta. So anyways, thanks for watching. For those of you who are going to pull for her, best of luck. I hope you get her. And until next time, peace out, boys.